breaking news. Tens of thousands of New Yorkers are gathering for the Rockefeller Center tree lighting. And understandably, security is normally airtight for the Rockefeller tree, and the country and the cities especially is still on edge while an all-out manhunt is happening right now in the Big Apple, likely to expand beyond the Big Apple. Brand new surveillance video coming in showing the moment a masked man gunned down the CEO of United Healthcare. There's the CEO walking. We're going to keep the video up, and you can see the man with a silenced pistol from behind. One shot into his leg, and then followed up with a number of shots into his chest. 50-year-old Brian Thompson died at the hospital. Police say he was in town for an investors meeting. We're going to walk you through exactly what happened and why this is so scary, why it has such broad-reaching implications, and the manhunt. The gunman had a suppressor on the weapon. New York City is one of 8 places where these types of silencers are illegal. Some police sources say this appears to be a Glock 19, which is one of the most commonly sold pistols in the United States. The next thing you'll notice, the shooter came up from behind, just feet away from his target. His first shot appears to hit Thompson perhaps in the back of the leg. After the first shot, again, it appears the gun jams, but the shooter is able to quickly clear the weapon and continuing firing. He hits Thompson a second time. It's worth noting law enforcement sources we spoke to said at this distance, we're only talking about a couple of feet here, a trained shooter would only need a single shot. A trained shooter, professional assassin, hitman, would be able to deliver multiple shots center mass into their target. So who exactly was this shooter and what was their motive? Regardless, investigators confirm they believe, and we can see this pretty clearly from the video, that someone waited perhaps for hours to kill the CEO of United Healthcare.
It appears the suspect was lying in wait for several minutes. Many people passed the suspect, but he appeared to wait for his intended target. I want to be clear. At this time, every indication is that this was a premeditated, pre-planned, targeted attack.
But why? That's the wild part of this. Investigators say the shooter then hopped on an electric bicycle and rode it to Central Park to get away. This was the last time he was seen. As far as whether or not this shooting was targeted, Thompson's wife told NBC News that there had been some threats against her husband. Quote, "I don't know, a lack of coverage, a lack of health care coverage, perhaps. I just know that he said there were people that had been threatening him." Begin tonight with Tracy Walder, former FBI special agent who spent time at the CIA as well. Also joined by Louis Shalero, former assistant director in charge of the FBI who ran its New York bureau. Mr. Shalero, start with you, sir. You think about the Rockefeller tree lighting right now in New York City. You think about tens of thousands of tourists who are in New York over the coming weeks for the holidays. If this was a targeted shooting, are we to believe that this gunman is probably on his way to Bali right now from JFK or still in New York?
I think, Leland, from what we saw today, I think it's pretty much certain that it was a targeting. Mr. Thompson was targeted. Bear in mind, he did not stay in the Hilton. He came from across the street, which means that the shooter had to lie in wait for him to come across. So I think the most indications are that this was a targeted, a targeted assassination, to really put it bluntly. The other thing to bear in mind is that you also have the New York City Police Department that really is the best in the world at providing security. They've done it many times. So I feel confident that the tree lighting is going to be a very, very safe event.
Tracy, from Central Park, we all know New York. You hop on the subway, you're at JFK, you're at Newark. Couple of hours later, if this was planned, he has a ticket to wherever. By the time the surveillance video is pulled, he's already on an international flight and then off to a non-extradition country. Just take us through the steps right now, investigatively, that the FBI is going through.
Look, I think really this attack or assassination, I completely agree with Lewis. That's what really this is, was planned. And it was planned for a really long time. And so they had to have had an exit strategy here. And so I would guess that this individual got out of Manhattan proper, at least, if not New York, very, very quickly before anyone would have had time to identify him. He had a days and days of planning of a head start. What the FBI and NYPD are probably doing together right now is a lot of video canvassing. There are a lot of videos, CCTVs, Ring doorbell cameras in this area. And they are really actually working probably backwards to see where this suspect came from. If you see, just a few minutes ago, actually, they released a photo of the suspect at a Starbucks. So they are actually working backwards in terms of video canvassing.
So I just want to be clear in terms of when you say backwards, that you're meaning the layperson like me would think they're working from the shooting forwards to where he is. You're saying they're going from the shooting backwards to see where he came from.
Correct. That's most likely what they're doing. I think they're also, in terms of his wife mentioning those threats, they are probably scouring Mr. Thompson's digital media, his social media, those kinds of things to see where some of those threats originated from. But this suspect really had a big head start on everyone.
Lewis, what do you make of the video in so much as a trained assassin, even somebody with proficient firearms training at that range, would not miss once? They probably would not miss twice. They'd hit center mass every time. It didn't seem as though this killer, while he may have targeted the CEO, knew exactly what he was doing. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is. I mean, I think he did, evidence some degree of skill. One of the theories, and I think I agree with it, is that the suppressor would cause the gun to not cycle if it's not a well-made weapon. So he did evidence some skills in being able to recycle the weapon several times, which indicates some degree of training. A little surprised at the distance of his first shot. When we look at the Castellano homicide, they came right on top of him. This was a little bit far, at least from the initial shot. But I think he did have some skill. And I think, as Tracy said, this was well planned. So I guess based on that, a little surprising that the weapon had to be recycled, but he did. He was able to do it.
The FBI and the NYPD made the point that he did not have a security detail with him. Take a listen.
From speaking to other employees that traveled with him to New York, it doesn't seem that he had a security detail. He left the hotel by himself. Was walking, didn't seem like he had any issues at all. So I don't think he did not have a security detail.
He didn't have a security detail. CEO of one of the largest companies in America, $281 billion in revenue. Round-the-clock protection for somebody like that with two bodyguards, about $1 million a year. This is what I think is most interesting. And Lewis, I want to get you on this. Insurance claim denial rates. United Healthcare has some of the highest denial rates in the country. We've all seen people who are angry at insurance companies. Is that just sort of the most basic place? If you're starting from ground zero of why this would happen to figure out who might have a motive, is that where you go?
I think to Tracy's point, the wife is reporting that there were threats. So I think that'll be the beginning stage to try to identify how those threats were received and then work from there, bearing in mind that a lot of this is going to occur in Minnesota. And certainly the idea of being denied health coverage is a very traumatic event. So that certainly could be one. The other interesting aspect of this is that we understand that they were also the subject of an insider trading case. In which they failed to report an antitrust investigation that caused the stock to plummet. They were also the subject of several lawsuits indicating that people have lost money on this. So you have a number of things that could conceivably become a motive. And I think, as Tracy said, the Bureau and the police department will begin analyzing the electronic surveillance, the electronic communication aspects of it. And I'm pretty confident they're going to really be able to narrow this down. The problem is that the longer the time goes on, the more extensive this investigation will have to become.
Tracy, just talk, relatively speaking, in terms of time. You spent a lot of time overseas for the Bureau as well. you do this in Manhattan. He's away from Minnesota. It takes a while for United Healthcare to talk to the FBI in Minnesota, for everybody to get their ducks in a row. If he got a noon flight from JFK, whoever this assassin is, by tomorrow morning, they're really anywhere in the world. Does that, I want to say, it obviously makes it harder, but does the fact that the would-be assassin has those options almost make it easier because you realize how wide the dragnet has to go so quickly?
Look, this is going to be really, really difficult if he did make it overseas. Obviously, the FBI's legal attaché offices will be involved, as well as probably the CIA stations as well overseas. They will all also be alerted to this, and they are probably combing through security footage at JFK, at LaGuardia as well. Look, I do think that this individual, and Lewis was talking about this before, I wholeheartedly agree about him not hitting the center of mass initially. This tells me that this is most likely not a hired assassin. This may actually be a disgruntled policyholder. And if that is the case, this individual has a family. And part of me wonders, is he going to, I guess, screw up, if you will, and contact that family? And will we be able to find him and trace him that way? So that's what part of me wonders. I'm starting to really think that this was not some kind of well-trained assassin. Certainly, you know, he was trained in firearms, but I don't think that this is what he does for a living. This may have been the disgruntled person themselves.
It's a wild story, Lewis, and you think about New York City, the New York Police Department, the FBI. I believe it's the largest field office that you used to run. I guess Washington's technically the largest, but outside of Washington. Incredible investigative resources. And all we have is this surveillance tape and the picture at Starbucks, at least publicly. Are we to believe that 12 hours after the shooting, the investigators have a lot more?
Well, certainly they have a lot more than we know. There was items recovered forensically. I think shell casings were recovered. There was a report that a cell phone may have been recovered. So you do have an awful lot that they'll work on. But as Tracy said, a lot of this is going to come from a review of the electronic, their cell phones, the CCTV coverage, how they were communicating. Up to your point, though, the first step has to be to identify him. Even if he were to be overseas, you have to be able to, kind of put a name to the face. So a lot of what you're doing right now, and you need to be commended, is really showing this to the public. In the event somebody could, give them some leads. So what they're doing right now between the Bureau and certainly the New York City and the Marshal Service is they're really kind of putting an investigative team together. And they're going to be culling a lot of leads that are coming in, believe me. But in my experience, and I spent a lot of time in New York, you're probably dealing with probably some of the finest detectives in the world. So, they're going to get to him. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind they'll find him. And I think it's just going to be a matter of time.
Wild, wild story. And I've often heard from so many in law enforcement, a picture is so much more than just a face, right? It's how somebody walks. It's how somebody holds their shoulders. It's whether somebody recognizes a backpack or not. Tracy, Lewis, thank you both for the insight and expertise on this 12 hours after one of the first targeted assassinations of a major CEO that this country's ever seen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pete Hegseth says he will keep fighting to be Donald Trump's defense secretary. Why that's good for Donald Trump, regardless if it's good for Pete Hegseth. Talk here in Washington. The next 24 hours will be critical for Pete Hegseth's bid to lead the Department of Defense. He was supposed to visit Trump at Mar-a-Lago tomorrow, but now he's not going. He's meeting with senators. But before we go any further, and this is an important point, we need to tell you the real issue isn't whether Hegseth is confirmed or not. That's what all the other cable networks are talking about. We're going to tell you what this means for the rest of President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet picks. Right now, the Polymarket betting odds give Hegseth a 17% chance of being confirmed, down from 74% chance less than a month ago. He's facing a troubling number of allegations about his character and his competency. Latest came in a piece from NBC News. Pete Hegseth's drinking-worried colleagues at Fox News. 10 current and former Fox employees say Trump's pick for defense secretary drank in ways that concerned his coworkers. A Trump transition spokesperson calls the claims completely unfounded and false. Hegseth pushed back on the hit piece in an interview with Megyn Kelly. And to be fair, a number of his on-air colleagues went on air and also on Twitter and said they had never seen a drinking problem exhibited by Pete Hegseth. Those are on the record. NBC has people who are anonymous. That said, in his own words, you can decide if the would-be defense secretary answered the question if he has an alcohol problem appropriately.
I've never sought counseling, never sought help. I respect and appreciate people who do. But, what do guys do when they come back from war oftentimes? Have some beers. How do you deal with the demons you see on the battlefield? Sometimes it's with a bottle.
All right, so on the Hill today, Hegseth told reporters following him around that Trump wants him to fight. That might be a good thing for Hegseth. It is his only chance to become defense secretary. It's been a brutal past couple of weeks for him and his family. But Pete Hegseth fighting is a great thing for Donald Trump. The longer Hegseth fights back against these attacks, the more time the throng of reporters you see right there spend chasing him around the Capitol. The more reporters who are looking into Pete Hegseth's life means there are less reporters to look into the rest of Donald Trump's nominees. Think of it almost like a bike race. All the nominees can draft behind Hegseth. Hegseth takes up all the oxygen right now, or all the ink, or all the clicks, just like Matt Gaetz did a couple of weeks ago. The notoriously anti-Trump Lincoln Project posted on X, "We're going to fight these appointments, every one of them." Chris Cillizza is here, journalist and senior advisor of the DGA Group. Welcome.
Hey,
welcome,
my friend.
Welcome. It's some level, right? The longer Pete Hegseth lasts, whether Donald Trump's going to drop him or not, okay, that helps all of Trump's other nominees.
Absolutely. I remember when we were on talking about Matt Gaetz. It was a brief period, right? 8 days. But I was on with you at one point in there, and I said, look, the happiest people about all the scrutiny on Matt Gaetz are literally everyone else he has picked. Well, now that's happened to Pete Hegseth, right? The reality of the situation is we know how these things work. There is a media furor that descends on one person.
And it can only be on one person.
It's really hard. You can do other reporting stuff, but I will tell you, having been in these newsrooms in the past 20 years, when you go in the morning, the editor is going to say, like, "Hey, what do you got on Hegseth?"
Right. Gaetz was the focus
right.
at one point. Now, this is an important point, and because it seems coordinated at some level, right? Because everybody was on Gaetz, now everybody's on Hegseth. At some point, either it's going to be clear Hegseth's done. Mm-hmm. Some would argue that's already happened. Yeah. We're just sort of waiting. But at some point, either we're done or you can't kill him. And people and the media will realize that, and then they will move on.
Yep.
Who's next?
Well,
is it RFK?
Okay. It's tough because I think Hegseth right now is certainly in a class of his own, and I probably would have said that a week ago too, but it's worse today certainly than it was a week ago. The fact that he made it till tonight, it's actually a good sign for him. When I got up this morning, I was like, may not make it all day. Made it till tonight. That's something. So every day you make counts. But so Hegseth, I think, without doubt, in a league of his own, and not in a good way. I think I would put Tulsi Gabbard next, Director of National Intelligence, and then RFK Jr. And again, we're splitting hairs a little bit.
Is this really about, though, advise and consent on these very serious issues, or is this really about scalps, right? The longer the media can embarrass Donald Trump, and Democrats love nothing more than watching Republicans flounder, and filleted out, that this is just about scalps, and there may never be enough.
Well, I'll say this. I do think there is a media feeding frenzy that happens in these situations, full stop. I will say, though, that a media frenzy alone is not why, if Pete Hegseth winds up not making it, that's not why he didn't make it. He didn't make it because 4 Republican senators went to either Donald Trump or Susie Wiles or someone very close to Donald Trump and said, it's not, like, I'm not changing my vote. Right. Now, the media obviously has a role to play in that because I think a lot of these people are influenced by what, these stories that have been running, the one you ran NBC, et cetera, over the last few days and weeks. But ultimately, if Republican senators are like, fine, they have 53 votes. Remember, when this stuff happens, we're still way in advance of it. Which, by the way, I wanted to talk about separately. One thing that's fascinating to me is, Trump announced all his cabinet so fast. these people just have time to kind of just sit out there.
There's a long time to twist in the wind.
There's no confirmation hearings until January. There's no confirmation votes until January. So it's a lot of twisting in the wind. It's kind of interesting that he did that. Somebody pointed that out to me today because I was so focused on, well, he's so much more prepared than he was in 2016 that he had won. He knew who he wanted. And it's like, yeah, I think that's true. But it also has the adverse effect to him of like, these people do kind of twist in the wind for a month and a half without any real ability to fight back other than like go on Megyn Kelly's podcast. It's not like they can go in front of the Judiciary Committee if you're the Attorney General nominee and testify.
Have your
right? You don't have your. That's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. But I will say, look, ultimately this is about there are 53 Republican senators when the 119th Congress convenes. If you can keep 50 of them in line with J.D. Vance as the vice president breaking ties, you are confirmed. So that's really, I don't think this is about the media filleting people. It is about, I think, Republican senators at least trying to assert some level of control.
Hold on, though. But if you think about this, the media needs something to talk about. And the personal lives of cabinet secretaries is great fodder.
I'm totally interested in that.
It always has been. So at some point, Pete Hegseth tweets out, I'm doing this for the war fighters, not the warmongers. The left is afraid of disruptors and change agents, so they smear with fake anonymous sources and BS stories. Our warriors never back down. Neither will I. He's not wrong, and MAGA world is not wrong to say, look, this may not even be about Pete Hegseth because the next person, and you agreed with me, if Hegseth's out...
Oh, there'll be a focus on...
The focus just...
Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr., no question. Yes.
And it's just going to keep going. I mean, if you're Kristi Noem, you're waiting... to the media and to Democrats, let's just set them up and knock them down.
Well, yeah, and I think there's always a level of scrutiny on cabinet nominees. I've been through this Democratic and Republican presidents and Trump president, which I put as its own category. There's always a level of scrutiny, and one or two, maybe three of them don't make it in the end. I will say, particularly with Gates, Hegseth, Gabbard, RFK Jr., no, maybe a little less, but those four. I think there is a broad sense among sort of the media world.
They're easy targets.
And yes, but because they believe them to be ill-equipped to do this, right?
Or they find them personally offensive, right? They sort of find them of Trump-like, and therefore there's nothing more offensive to Washington than people who hate Washington.
Which, again, I'm not debating the merits of Pete Hegseth as the nominee or any of these people, really, Matt Gaetz and his people. I just continue to be amazed that people are amazed. Like, he literally said there is a riot in Washington. All of these establishment figures, right and left, need to be gone. And then he picks people who are not part of that club, and people are like, he literally said
he was going to do it.
What he was going to do.
That's what he ran on.
You can agree or disagree whether these people have to, they don't have the right qualifications. His whole point was the people who have the right qualifications have done a bad job. So, of course, he's not going to pick a four-star general who is the Joint Chief of Staff. You know what I mean? It's the nature of the beast. He's going to pick someone like
who's a disruptor.
And again, I'm not debating. We can debate his merits whether he do a good or bad job. My point is, don't be surprised. This is exactly
don't be surprised, or maybe also don't be aghast, right? Because that's just sort of the way.
I feel like we've been aghast for 9.5 straight years. Got to get over that at some point.
That may be the best thing you've ever said. Good to see you, buddy.
Thanks, dude.
Democrats want to make the fight over transgender Americans the civil rights fight of our generation. How today they just had a huge setback. Today, at the Supreme Court, the transgender rights movement jumped the shark. To be fair, the jump sort of began last night when the ACLU lawyer posed to argue before the Supreme Court, tried out some of his thoughts, his arguments, what he would say to the Supreme Court on CNN.
And these are young people who may have known since they were 2 years old exactly who they are, who suffered for 6-7 years before they had any relief. And what's happening here, it's not the kids who are consenting to this treatment, it's the parents who are consenting to the treatment. And as a parent, I would say when our children are suffering, we are suffering.
2-year-olds are able to know they are girls trapped in a boy's body, according to the ACLU, and must be given very powerful hormones. It is their right, argues the ACLU. And it's not just the ACLU. The Biden administration argued today against the Tennessee law that bans, quote, gender-affirming care, hormone treatment for anybody under 18 years of age. 2-year-olds knowing they aren't the wrong sex perhaps isn't enough for shock value. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson compared restricting the castration of kids to restricting the interracial marriage of adults.
They sound in the same kinds of arguments that were made back in the day, 50s, 60s, with respect to racial classifications and inconsistencies. I'm thinking in particular about Loving, and the court starts off by saying that Virginia is now one of 16 states which prohibit and punish marriages on the basis of racial classifications. And when you look at the structure of that law, it looks in terms of, you can't do something that is inconsistent with your own characteristics. It's sort of the same thing.
Tom Dupree's here, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under George W. Bush. Tom, always a pleasure. Thank you. In these cases, and we've seen this before in social movements, right? When you reach so far that 2-year-olds can decide if they're boys or girls and must then get these very powerful medicines because of that. Is that where sort of common sense takes over from the law?
Yeah, Leland, this is a classic case, I think, where the challengers to Tennessee's ban wanted to portray this as a great question of constitutional law, as we heard from Justice Jackson, kind of the next segment of Loving versus Virginia, which was the classic old, interracial marriage case the Supreme Court decided decades ago. But what we heard today is that a majority of the Supreme Court simply doesn't see it that way. They don't see this case as involving incredibly important, momentous questions of constitutional rights. They see this as a case about medical treatment. And one theme we heard over and over again from a majority of the justices, the conservative justices, is that this is a case about medical treatments that are best left to the democratic process, and these are decisions that are properly made by a legislature, not by a court.
So the Tennessee law bans hormone treatments, what transgender advocates call gender-affirming care, what child advocates say is mutilation, from happening under the age of 18, regardless of parental consent or medical advice. They make the argument, the transgender advocates, and I think Ketanji Brown Jackson was doing the same thing, that this is somehow a civil rights issue, that the transgender rights for kids is civil rights. And Justice Alito asked some questions about that I think probably go to the heart now, not just of this case, but perhaps sort of this argument for our time. Take a listen.
Are there individuals who are born male, assigned male at birth, who at one point identify as female, but then later come to identify as male, and likewise for individuals who are assigned female? Are there not such people?
There are such people. I agree with that, Justice.
So it's not an immutable characteristic, is it?
What is so important about that word immutable?
Sure. Well, immutable characteristics are really the basis for a lot of modern constitutional law and anti-discrimination law. In other words, generally speaking, you can't discriminate on the basis of immutable characteristics, which typically would be looked at as, say, racial classifications, for example. And so that was one of the issues that the justices were debating today, about whether or not gender is something that's mutable and kind of changes over time, or whether it's something that stays fixed in place. So this really, I think, does call into question whether or not the justices, or a majority of the justices, are going to see this case as one that does involve immutable characteristics, as one that does implicate questions of equal protection and other constitutional protections that we as a society historically have given to things like racial classifications, which are in large part forbidden under the law.
So the civil rights movement, right? The civil rights movement, Martin Luther King said, I share your values. I share American values. I want the same rights. Gay rights movement, same thing. Share your values. I want to get married. I want your rights. The transgender movement says, I don't share your values. You must change your values so I can have my rights. Is that where this is headed? That now the ACLU said it's not an immutable characteristic, since gender is fluid by their own definition, then it's not a civil right more broadly?
Well, that could be where we're headed. I mean, look, I think what we saw today is that there's still just a lot of questioning and confusion and uncertainty about the basic facts of these cases, about what these treatments involve, whether gender is mutable or not mutable. And I think it makes it a very difficult environment for the challengers to make headway in trying to elevate this to the status of a constitutional right. Because what we heard from the justices again and again today is that people are still wrestling with the science, and doctors are disagreeing, and medical professionals are disagreeing about, whether these are on balance helpful, on balance harmful, that sort of thing. So I think it's going to take some time before these facts all get established enough to make judges confident enough to weigh in rather than leave these decisions to medical professionals and to state legislatures.
Yeah, we learned one more thing. Justice Alito is a little bit tougher of an interview than Jake Tapper is for that ACLU lawyer. There we go. We finally got Dupree to smile. All right, it's been 4 years on this show, and there we go. All right, it's good to see you, my friend. Thank you. You haven't heard of the massive bridge in Cincinnati that will be closed for months, maybe even years, because of a massive fire that probably started from a homeless encampment. That's because the bridge isn't on I-95 in the Democratic stronghold of Philadelphia. When a fire consumed that bridge in Philadelphia, President Biden promised an all-hands-on-deck approach. 12 days later, President Biden celebrated its reopening. But no, nobody covered the Big Mac Bridge fire on November 1st, even though it burned hot enough to warp the steel supports. A month later, the fire department can't seem to figure out why it started, not that they seem all that interested in it. The I-471 bridge carries not only rush hour traffic between Cincinnati and the bedroom communities of Kentucky, but massive amounts of truck and freight traffic. Color us shocked. There is no interest in Washington, or maybe even in downtown Cincinnati, of blaming homeless camps for this. And there's less interest in Washington on whether the bridge gets fixed. First wrote about this in War Notes. That's our daily newsletter. Comes out at 4:05 p.m. Eastern every day. You can sign up for free at warnotes.com. Bill Maher says he may call it quits rather than spend 4 more years leading the Trump resistance team. What will Trump do if he doesn't have anybody fighting against him? Donald Trump got shot. He got up, he took to the microphone, and he yelled, "Fight, fight, fight." Now it looks like he might not have that much to fight against, because some of the most vocal anti-Trump resistance is not looking for another round. For example, Bill Maher.
I mean, I may quit, because I don't want to do another. I did Trump. I did all the Trump stuff before anybody. I called him a con man before anybody. He's a mafia boss. I was the one who said he wasn't going to concede the election. I've done it.
Bill Maher says he's done it. And in terms of shock value here in Washington, Congressman Jim Clyburn, the head of the resistance, who was against everything Donald Trump was for, just said this.
You would support pardoning Trump for the federal crimes?
Yes, I could. Absolutely. Because the Supreme Court has pretty much made it very clear that he is preemptively pardoned of anything he may do as president.
Okay, there's also the New York mayor who's backing down. We'll get to that in a minute. Now says he's going to help Trump with deportations. But there's one person who is going to stand tall against Donald Trump, and that's California Governor and presidential hopeful Gavin Newsom. He held a special session of the legislature this weekend in hopes to defend California from potential, quote, federal overreach. He'll be ready, he says, when Donald Trump takes office in 47 days. With us now, California State Representative Joe Patterson, who was at that special session. I think what's interesting about this, we're talking about Trump-proofing California. That's Gavin Newsom's words. $25 million for the California Department of Justice to file lawsuits, I guess, and $10 million to help county and city attorneys probably do some of the same things. During his first term, California sued the administration, the Trump administration, more than 120 times and spent $42 million in litigation costs. So is this just about having money to sue Donald Trump so Gavin Newsom can do interviews?
No. Well, yeah, basically, I think this is a special session to help pump his presidential campaign more than actually solving problems in California. And we didn't need a special session last time California wanted to sue Trump. So this is really about Newsom and his presidential ambitions.
To that end, and look, we saw California, as every state did, especially the blue states, move towards Donald Trump. You've got the New York mayor, Eric Adams, for example, now saying, hey, look, I'm in on deporting illegal immigrants. Take a listen.
Well, cancel me, because I'm going to protect the people of this city. And if you come into this country, in this city, and think you're going to harm innocent New Yorkers and innocent migrants and asylum seekers, this is not the mayor you want to be in the city under.
Okay, so you've got almost the rest of the country saying, I'm not going to fight against Trump because there's a lot that he's doing that's popular. What does Gavin Newsom understand, you think, that they don't?
Oh, I don't think he understands. I don't think he got the message from the recent election. I mean, we picked up 3 seats in the legislature in California in deep blue areas, by the way. I mean, Californians were saying, hey, we want problems solved. We don't want to spend money on your presidential ambitions, but I don't think he really cares. I mean, the clip you're showing aside me right now, he literally looks like a car salesman giving this speech. So it's become all about him rather than actually addressing the issues we have in California, which is the highest unemployment, the second highest unemployment rate, the highest gas prices, the highest utility prices. People can't get insurance, but here he is holding a special session on something voters just said they don't want to deal with.
Fascinating. All right. Well, we will follow it, what the lawsuits are. Representative Patterson of California, thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon. Women on social media. New thing on social media, they are suddenly celebrating their value as wives and, this is a word, hyper-femininity. How Donald Trump's election might explain the success of the hit show Bama Rush.
The University of Alabama is the top sorority recruitment in all of the country. Rush consists of 4 highly competitive rounds.
Let's be honest, I probably would not be going to Alabama if it did not blow up on TikTok.
Over the Thanksgiving weekend, you might have missed the wildest New York Times op-ed I have ever read. Sarah Bernstein writes how our messed up dating culture leads to loneliness, anger, and Donald Trump. In 2017, researchers at the University of Utah found that in unbalanced populations, the more common sex must cater to the preferences of the rarer sex in order to acquire a mate. This could explain why today social media is rife with male fantasies from beautiful, submissive trad wives, that's traditional wives, to the hyper-feminine sorority pledges of Bama Rush. Could also explain why, alongside popular hashtags like Marry Up and Rich Men, another trending topic is celibacy for women. There is an awful lot to unpack there. Professor Scott Galloway gives us the other side.
The most dangerous person in the world is a lonely, young, broke male. It makes them angry, detached. They're more likely to be prone to misogynistic content. They think it's a woman's fault. And so women are leveling up, and it's great. But they're not interested in the men our society is producing right now. The single point of failure for a man, a boy, is when he loses a male role model. He becomes 3 times more likely to kill himself, 4 times less likely to go to college. We need to put more men back into boys' lives.
All right. I'm not smart enough to make sense of all of this, but these two folks are. Here we go. Yeah. Chief Strategy Officer of Workforce and Labor Culture, Jessica Kriegel, and relationship expert, author of The Manual. A True Bad Boy explains how men think, date, and mate, and what women can do to come out on top. Steve Santagati, nice to see both of you. Ladies first. Thank Jessica, you. How much of this can be explained simply by work, right? That we're now seeing a lot of situations where women are dating men who are less financially successful than them?
Well, I'll be curious to see what Steve has to say about this, but in the workplace, this is not a thing. I mean, CEOs are not worried about hyperfemininity. They're not worried about the manosphere. People are focused on driving results, and sometimes that's a woman that can drive the best results, and sometimes that's a man. And so these generalizations is, it's simple-mindedness, and frankly, it's a distraction, I think, from reality.
Steve?
Well, the fact remains that the old adage, you can't fool Mother Nature, is because we're sick of having all that pushback of this, people telling us how to be apologetic for being male, or be apologetic for being beautiful. I was talking to your producer earlier today, and I said one of the tipping points is men were sick of hearing things like having a transgender do a Bud Light commercial speaking to men. Look, he is right. Mr. Galloway is correct. Men do need male role models. Even when you're teaching a new hunting dog how to hunt, they put the puppy with a mature dog. If it works in nature, it works with human beings, because we are not a backdrop to nature. We are nature. And this, the best part about this was all this political correct bull started. I said, wait. And now I get to say I told you so, because at the end of the day...
Jessica, aren't we seeing that happen in workplaces, right? And one of the places people used to meet and mate was at work, and now that's really frowned upon.
There's a very narrow band of socially acceptable behavior in the workplace, and it's a civilizing narrow band. And so you're not seeing any of it. No CEO is worried about women in power. No one has a problem with having a female boss anymore. People are showing up like adults. So on with it.
All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, a lot of guys got scared. We had this Me Too movement, which turned into a witch hunt. And then you see situations like where married men are getting ripped off by their ex-wives. We had a situation in Texas where this guy's wife took his kid off and did a transgender surgery in, I think, California or something. Men are afraid. We have to record you. Do you consent to sex? Do you consent to this relationship? And the fact of the matter is that men need to man up. They need to become men again. Learn how to use a cordless drill. Learn how to change a tire. Learn how to protect and take care of a woman. Stop being such a wimp. Okay, I'm sick of it.
You know what's funny? I've been dating my fiance for 3 years, and I changed her tire when she had a flat tire, and she was stunned, absolutely stunned that I knew how to change the tire, which I don't know whether that says more about me in a good way or a bad way, that she was stunned that I was able to change a tire. Jessica, though, I'll give you the last word on this because I think it's fascinating here. The workplace has changed. Has that been a good thing net for women, or are women now having an issue with it because it's harder to find a man at work who you want to date?
It's not only a good thing for women, it's a good thing for the workplace. We did a study at Culture Partners last year. When companies have more women in leadership, they have more results. They drive more results than companies that only have men in leadership. So if it's good for the business and it's good for women, it's good for everyone.
All right, fair enough. Steve, Jessica, thank you both very much. Excellent conversation. Links to the op-ed, which you do want to read, on War Notes. The manhunt continues in New York and worldwide for the assassin of one of America's top executives. Chris with more next.
All right, Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to News Nation, and thank you.